Crossbones and Skulls: A Dead Man's Riddle by John Jude. Preface. Time is running out as the storm grows cold. Admiral Juan Santos Nelson's death is the spark, but the riddle tied to the myth of Solomon's gold is the fire. This isn't just a pirate tale, it's a philosophical odyssey wrapped in cannon fire and existential crises, where every clue leads deeper into the soul's reckoning. If the bait is greed, then Solomon's wisdom is the hook hidden within 5 ancient coins that hold the keys to solving the riddle. These coins are scattered across a cursed ring of islands so forsaken that even God is said to have abandoned them. To find the clues will require more than gunpowder and wit. It will take an uneasy trust between 2 bitter enemies who must unite and solve the dead man's riddle before the final storm consumes them both. Either way, it will cost them everything, because the riddle doesn't just demand answers, it demands transformation. This is the story of revenge turning into an impossible redemption. This is a reading of Crossbones and Skulls: A Dead Man's Riddle by John Jude, John Echo. Chapter 1, Parts 1 through 3, pages 1 through 57. Thank you for joining me, your host, Erica, through Speechify, text-to-speech. At the end of this reading, please leave a comment, subscribe, or feel free to buy the book currently on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. Author's note: this is a fictional story set within real historical times, places, and events. Most characters are fictional, though they occasionally interact with real historical figures. None of this is intended to be historically accurate. With the exception of one painting, Sports on the Frozen River, by Ert Vanderneer, all other paintings and images were generated and edited using Midjourney.com and Microsoft products. The artists mentioned within this novel did not create or commission these artworks. All AI-generated images are the intellectual property of the author, John Jude. All writing within the novel is original and not AI-generated. However, AI tools were used to assist with grammar and spelling. The storyline, characters, and details are entirely the author's own. Copyright August 2025, Independent Publishing. All music is credited to their respective creators. Dedication page. To God, you've given me a sliver of creativity and a piece of your wisdom when I deserve neither. Through the wisdom I have found my salvation in your grace alone, and through the creativity a great story is born. Thank you. Special thanks to Gail Finch for your unwavering honesty and heartfelt input throughout this book. Thank you for your patience during the writing of my first novel, and for believing in me every step of the way. Horses truly bring people together, and this story is proof. Chapter 1, Part 1, A Dead Man's Riddle. "It's the Admiral, all right," reported Lieutenant Keyes to James Hemsworth while standing next to him as they both surveyed the dead body on the beach. Lord Juan Santos Nelson, Admiral of the HMS Revenge. James Ryan Hemsworth, a well-respected captain of the British Royal Navy, by all appearances, was slightly above the average height of 5 feet 5 inches for an 18th-century man of Europe. With his light blue eyes, fair skin, dark features, and neatly trimmed brown hair, he presented a most professional, yet typical look for an English officer in uniform of his time. Deep colors of navy blues and stitched gold embroidery made it impossible to mistake his position as any other except that of an officer. But, for all his accomplishments, trials, and time spent earning his rank as a captain, at that moment it all meant nothing to him as he kneeled next to the dead body in somberness. James looked into the once life-filled brown eyes of the Admiral. This was not how he had imagined seeing the Admiral for the last time. Hemsworth knew Lord Juan Santos Nelson and had great respect for the seaman. To most he was simply called Lord or Sir Santos, but to James, Juan Santos was far more than a fleet admiral and a titled lord. He was a lifelong teacher, and above all, one of the greatest friends he had ever known. To see his lord now, a lifeless body slumped and battered on the beach, despite this, James could not help but feel somewhat numbed, even prone to callousness, when looking into the eyes of someone who changed his entire world in profound and positive ways. Give it enough service time and action, that was the military for you. And it did its job well as it battled hardened men, adapting them to horrors of death no one should ever see or go through. To the average serviceman of the Royal Navy, death was nothing more than just part of the game, another chess piece waiting to be placed permanently in a box. Death was simply a part of the risk in living life on the high seas. From the highest officer to the lowest-ranking sailor, it was a strange game everyone had agreed to play the moment they stepped onto any warship. No one really knew just how bad this game was until it touched them in ways that merited death's respect and forever changed their lives. But until then, death never played fair, and the trade-off was never equal to the rewards. The endless risk of eternity versus a moment's battle exchange for a wage of silver was truly a fool's game. Even if the permanence of death was not fated that day by the shooting of a cannon or the plunge of a dagger into a chest, the promise of death during low risk was always there, lingering where life moved. You could always find death somewhere on board. If she wasn't found within any of the ship's cabins, or found ready to burst at seams of repair-neglected hulls of vessels, or found within the storage of the men's food and water supplies waiting to be consumed, she could be found within the very hearts of men, trying to turn sailors against each other through cramped, foul, and salty living conditions the sea life offered. However, like a true woman aboard a ship full of superstitious men, death, during times of low risk, she was treated no different than a god aboard, ever present, yet in the background, being tolerated, but never taken seriously. This casual coexistence would prevail until the day a crew member became too careless with her, brushed too close to her the wrong way, or tempted her beyond his ability to control or foresee the outcome. Whenever that happened, her touch came back as a reminder of just how real the game was, and to take her as seriously as the god that allowed her to reign on this earth. Despite knowing death as if she were a common passenger aboard his ship, coming and going as she pleased, James was unprepared for this particular death, that of Sir Juan Santos. Mentally unable to accept this reality, the one in which death carried a very authentic weight, James could not fully grasp it, even when he was facing it directly. Like everyone else, James only knew what it was to live. So the idea of death was almost as surreal as the world in which James found Juan Santos. On the edge of only a few handfuls of maps there existed a ring of islands too cursed to hold an official name. If it were not for their location, wiser men simply would do better to forget altogether their existence. This island ring was a nameless, godless group of smaller islands that encompassed one single large mountainous volcanic island, believed to have been somewhere deep within the heart of the Pacific Ocean. The remote ring was as removed from any civilization as one possibly could be. To sailors lucky enough to survive sailing near them, these islands never had an official name. Instead, these islands were known by their locals as Ekati Golapera Madir M. Tayu, which translated to death within a rose, but more commonly known to the English, French, and Spaniard sailors alike as simply the Islands of Sorrows, serving as a warning to all approaching ships. The few lucky sailors who did survive these islands always did two things once they returned to civilization. First, they got a tattoo of a black rose. It wasn't in recognition of an achievement or as a badge of honor like the other tattoos that adorned naval seamen and pirates alike. This tattoo served as a stark warning. The second the sailors did was promise themselves to never talk about their experiences or ever return to these islands. Despite the fact that their times sailing to these islands were brief, the sailors' goal was to bury every thought they had about those islands. The black rose tattoo and commitment of never speaking of the place were evidence that the person truly had survived the island ring, and wasn't just someone lying about hells and experiences they knew nothing of. On the rare occasion you could get a sailor to break and tell you about the islands, they were always the same horrifying descriptions. The details never changed from one man to another, even when sailors never had met each other, thus confirming the credibility of those who really went there. The beach, where Juan Santos had come to die, was littered with bones of various animals and smashed human remains. Dozens of human skulls laid partially buried in the sand. Each skull, with a gruesome tale to tell, was evidence of a hideous, violent end. The grotesque bones were so deformed that rarely could the cause of death be determined. Charred remains of both skeletal limbs and limbs of trees poked out of the sand, giving further evidence of an uncivilized civilization inhabiting the islands. Perhaps these bones had been burnt offerings of unsuspecting victims, sacrifices to appeal to the local ancient island gods, the gods themselves now just as dead as the victims. Or perhaps, as legends went, these collections of odd, mismatched bones of animals and humans were spat out onto the beaches by the once feared Leviathan, known to sink ships and swallow men whole into the heart of the sea. But for all the unknown rumors and mystical folklore of the islands, one particular tale stood out amongst most sailors that survived the hellish experience. These sailors talked of young, beautiful women, luring them in with songs that would captivate them. The melodies inspired the men to draw closer to make land. After a long voyage, the temptation proved to be too much as they would willingly abandon their ships and make way to the beaches, where the songs and beauty of the sirens could be both heard and seen. These were the same sirens that, according to ancient apocryphal accounts, were once the wives of fallen angels in a time of old. They bore a race of half-men, half-fallen angelic hybrids that became the heroes of the old, the ones they called the Nephilim, a race of giants. In response, God enacted a divine punishment against the world through a great deluge against these unnatural births. The women who had borne such offenses against the creator of the universe became cursed as sirens at sea awaiting final judgment. Until that final judgment day came, as cursed beings with hate for God and his image-bearers, as well as love for their unnatural children, the sirens continued to lure men of weak minds and sexual frustrations out from the open seas. The sailors followed the songs and seduction onto the beach where the men became easy prey and a satisfying meal for their children of giants. No one really knew if the myth regarding this volcanic island ring, and why sailors kept to themselves about this matter was true. Very few sailors ever came back, and of those who did, only a very small number recounted their experiences. The truthfulness of the men who either were bold enough or foolish enough to speak of the islands was often called into question. Perhaps the horrors described were too unbelievable for the modern world to comprehend. Regardless, the reporting sailor's future was at stake. At best, the sailor risked having his reputation damaged, and his story attributed to nothing more than seasickness or madness. At worst, the maritimer's career he had built over his lifetime was reduced to a heap of ashes and never restored. With all the uncertainty surrounding the limited stories, one thing was certain. If the sailors would not open up what they had seen, the natives of the island ring were more than willing to share details about their particular island. They readily spoke of another tribe known as the Dakoti and their cannibalistic lifestyle, which gave credence to the legends of the giants, a fundamental bedrock concerning the history of the islands. In any case, the myths fueled an abject fear of these islands, and of the monsters that were believed to lurk deep in its seas. Whenever a ship sailed near the island ring, with no evidence of cannibals or giants or sirens, and the men needing a reprieve from the sea, one island was especially enticing. This island was so beautiful, men would compare it to a woman of unparalleled beauty, one who all men desired secretly in their dreams but could never have. This island also was where the Black Rose, famous as the tattoo inked upon the forearm of the fortunate sailors who actually returned from the islands, grew. The lush, tropical terrain, surrounded by a vast sea-green ocean desert, provided the perfect environment for the ebony-petaled rose hidden somewhere rumored to be within the forbidden cavern of lights within its topography. Nowhere else in the world had men seen such a rose, like black velvet traced with golden outlines on its edges and golden leaves to match. This rose, full of fragrance, unknown in any other part of the world, had a flavor that was sweet and with a bitter aftertaste. The rare petals and leaves provided quick healing to anyone who ate them. However, as with anything on the island, it came with a heavy price. Any unfortunate soul who ate either the flower or the golden leaf of the rose paid with their sanity, numbing the mind while slowly slipping into an incurable madness, eventually driving a man to end his life. This island, breathtakingly beautiful and entirely irresistible from a distance, was in fact cursed and full of dangers. Like the thorns on the black rose, the island stung many admirers passing by. Should sailors still choose to make landfall despite all the warnings, a final caution stood within clear sight of any ship passing by its beaches. 3 large menacing pikes could be seen buried in the sand. Each of the pikes was 7 feet tall with a skull impaled on it. The macabre posts served to show how the local inhabitants treated any unwelcome guests. Even more alarming, there was a clearly visible burned cross on the forehead of each of the skulls. The charred markings were an unmistakable threat to any and all religions, specifically Christians, who dared to challenge the local god's reign and superiority over this untamed, savage ring of islands. It was on this beautiful island, where the pike stood and the black wild rose grew, so much of the drama unfolded with the death of Lord Juan Santos. Under the same pikes and further out on the beach, large centipedes and other sand dwellers reacted by hiding into empty cranial cavities of skulls lying in the ground. The animals had been disturbed by the sound of shuffling as sailors' boots made contact with the coarse sands of the beach. While James and Lieutenant Keyes looked at the dead admiral, the beach was crowded with a dozen sailors walking past them towards the skiffs, each man wearing and carrying as many valuables as possible. They wore items of silver, pearls, and gold around their fingers, wrists, and neck. Their hands were busy toting chests too heavy for one man to maneuver. This loot was the treasure Lord Juan Santos had hoped to use to entice the infamous pirate McMahon and his crew. Instead, the admiral was found mysteriously dead, with a prized ship marooned in a cove. To add to the conundrum, all the treasure was left behind on the beach, further adding complexity to an assignment James was not expecting when hunting a pirate. A sad ending to one of the greatest admirals under whom I have had the honor to serve, James said, as he closed his lord's eyes for the final time. By now, the stench of the body was so unbearable that James had to stand up and walk away, suggesting the admiral had been decomposing for several days. But before James stood up, a strange, strong feeling of déjà vu hit him. This was followed by a sudden, overwhelming nausea. James immediately felt lightheaded as things appeared distorted and his mind began spinning. The déjà vu produced an intense, strange familiarity with this beach, this island, and the awareness he had been here before doing the same thing but at another time. The feeling became so overpowering. It was as if James felt he had been pulled into a strong delusional trance against his will. Then, boom. In the near distance, death was once again busy on the decks of 2 ships, collecting her wages as cannons opened fire. The heavy cannonballs hit their targets. The Corvus shattered the starboard side of the opposing HMS Sea Runner, as the 2 ships grazed each other in the open deep-watered cove. Boom, boom. The sounds of the thunderous cannons, again followed by the wooden ship's hull's violent cracking and clacking, was enough to snap James's attention right back into the present moment of his surroundings from his unsighted trance. James again looked at Admiral Juan Santos, but this time his gaze was drawn to the admiral's longsword that laid over his feet. The sword, a straight double-edged blade, and the long grip for two-handed use was an unusual choice for an admiral, as most admirals preferred a cutlass. The shorter, lighter blade of a cutlass made it easier for fighting in close quarters or on decks as the combatant slashed his way in or out of trouble. Choosing a sword made for medieval knights on horseback was curious, but Sir Juan Santos was a man of unique tastes and preferred something larger to match his physique and power. James's eyes followed the silhouette of the sword from the hilt down to the shiny Damascus steel blade and all the way to the end of its point sticking into the sand. There, next to Juan Santos's right lifeless leg, not far from the longsword point embedded in the sand, laid a note. James could not help but fix his gaze. Upon looking at the note, Immediately, James could deduce its value simply by identifying the handwriting of its contents, to be none other than Juan Santos. Years ago, when first in the service training under Juan Santos, James had the privilege to transcribe the Admiral's public thoughts onto paper. So often Juan Santos would have James write down many of his daily thoughts, in order for James to get the feel of how an admiral's mind worked while on duty. Then later being able to reflect on these notes during his leisurely downtime. Even though most notes held little to no value after a day's worth of work, once in a while a note that started off as a reminder or task turned out to be one of James's greatest lessons regarding his naval career. Most of these lessons came when Juan Santos took the liberty of personally writing a note himself, giving it always great value to James. Remembering significant notes from the past, James felt compelled to read this handwritten note lying on the sand. His interest was piqued as he read. "It's a riddle," concluded James. "This doesn't make any sense." "What, my dear friend, are you trying to tell me?" Another loud round of cannons being fired interrupted James's thought process as the sounds echoed off the cliff walls of the island. This time the thunder of the cannons was much closer to him and his men. As James looked up and towards the open cove, he saw a large ship getting dangerously close to the shoreline, sailing mere inches from the bottom. It was James's ship, the HMS Sea Runner, and she was coming in fast in an attempt to outpace and gain some distance between her and her smaller yet superior hunter. Simultaneously, the ship was trying to buy some time for James and his men to eventually board. It was too late. Boom, boom. The cracking timbers of the ship could be heard from the shore as one of the main masts snapped, due to the blows from the cannonballs. The sound resembled that of a tall, fractured pine tree in a forest before falling to the ground, upsetting everything beneath it and around it as it landed. On deck of the HMS Sea Runner, a petroleum mixed with tree resins and other closely secret guarded ingredients, upon ignition created a green vibrant flame, which then broke out, immediately consuming the hemp-made sails that draped on the deck from the broken mast. Barrels containing whale oils intended for storage had somehow imprudently failed to make it below decks before the attack ever came. The barrels had been badly damaged from the falling masts, and as a result, whale oil leaked onto the surface of the main upper decks, giving the hungry and relentless fire more fuel. Everything kissed by the flames was shrouded in a smoky black silhouette of a horseman riding a steed up and down the deck of the ship, scales balanced in the rider's hands. Death, the rider of the black horse, had now come back to reclaim what she missed the first time. From the distance, the fire continued, and the intensity of the flames changed as they swept the deck on a ship far too large to be completely consumed all at once. So for now, it would focus its flames on the top deck of the ship. For the sailors aboard the Sea Runner who were still capable, duties were split as the battle to save their ship became a two-front war, one against raiders, the other against nature. Soon these men, as hard as they tried to fight the fire, realized it was becoming hopeless. This was a Greek fire. Unlike where water would typically extinguish a fire, this fire thrived on men's ignorance as they doused this fire with water, only creating more chaos and confusion, as the Greek flames lashed out with a greater fury, causing even more havoc everywhere, allowing the fire to spread even more. It was just a matter of time before the scales of the horsemen on deck would tip into death's favor, using this fire to consume everyone and everything on board. While on the beach, Lieutenant Keyes and the crew members had noticed that their ship, surprisingly, was not far from them out in the water. In fact, it was moving past them at a slow enough speed where the men could still attach themselves with the rope ladders thrown over the side, but fast enough to keep her predator busy keeping up. "Sir," Keyes yelled to James, "we have to get back to our ship. The rest of the crew needs us." Normally, James would have taken immediate action through quick and decisive command, but another strange, overwhelming, peculiar feeling came over him at that moment. This was not a feeling the physical body could produce, but a feeling of everything outside of the body, the feeling of spatial awareness coming to a standstill. It was the sensation of witnessing the very fabric of time coming to a sudden halt as everything around James went quiet and completely still. In the stillness and silence, James could only hear his heartbeat. Lub-dub, lub-dub. The sound was faint and then grew louder and louder as his heart rhythmically pounded in his chest. Lud-dub, lub-dub. Despite being present in the moment, James could not hear the sound of Keyes' voice, the cries of his men, or the sound of the enemy's cannons. He was even deaf to the sound of the nearby waves starting to violently crash onto the shore. Yet he was all too aware of all that was going on, making this moment a more surreal, timeless moment that he somehow managed to feel more than comprehend. His attention shifted toward the dead admiral's right hand. Covering his hands, the admiral wore custom-made, embroidered, leather black gloves. His right hand was positioned such that his palm faced the sand with his fingers clenched tightly. Curiously, when James's attention focused on Juan Santos's hand, the fingers relaxed as if he had somehow unlocked a magical box with his mind. The fingers opened up like a flower in bloom and revealed a treasure. A single gold coin dropped onto the sand. This coin was unlike any other gold coin James had ever encountered. Not only was it different in appearance from traditional Spanish doubloons, but it was marked with a Hebrew symbol on its face. It was apparent that the etched symbol did not reflect its worth, as this marking was added at some time after the coin's production date. As James looked at the coin, his years of education that sometimes seemed more like exposure to conspiracy theories influenced his mind, as he considered the possibilities of what kind of coin he held in his hand. In much of his earlier years, before James studied naval warfare, his curiosity led him to old books and scrolls neglected within the archives of large dusty wings of old monasteries. He also spent many enjoyable hours in the personal libraries of any noble willing to let him read their collections. He especially fancied ancient history, and what drove men to act the way they acted. Jewish history fascinated James the most. What started as a way to pass time became a passion to him, as he read the stories of how the world came to be through the Word of God. Other history books centered around great and small kings, battles between great houses, and the broken love that started such conflicts in the first place. These all appealed to an earthly audience. Jewish history, however, was far different and alive. Other history seemed pale in comparison. Jewish history was dramatic, full of creation and destruction, saints and sinners, gods and goddesses, angels and demons, men and monsters, a savior, and a promise of salvation through future events yet to come. All of it somehow was miraculously written and recorded through men by a living God who took credit for all of it. This Textus Receptus, or Bible as James came to know it, was all fascinating to him, yet something he half-heartedly believed. Amongst all the different scrolls and books, somewhere in between truths and fantasies, James had come across one conspiracy theory that had really captured his fascination. Although he was not an expert in the subject, James knew enough to realize the significance of the coin, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a coin from the rumored Solomon's gold that he had read about in one of the collections of scrolls, titled The Exploits of Alvaro de Mendana. Alvaro was an explorer who had ventured his way from Spain into the South Pacific in the late 16th century. He was chasing a legend that supposedly led him to discover where the biblical king Solomon obtained the gold for his temple in Jerusalem. For most historians, the story ended there. Some historians, on the other hand, were as captivated by Alvaro's account as James was. Alvaro claimed the coins and their myth painted a much more sophisticated legend yet to be uncovered. According to the legends, these coins, totaling 5, were crafted at the time of King Solomon, between the years of 970 to 931 BCE. The biblical story describes that, in a dream, God appeared to Solomon and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." In response, Solomon requested that God give him a discerning heart to judge God's people and distinguish between right and wrong. God was pleased with this request and granted Solomon wisdom, along with wealth and honor. At the end of his life, the myth contends, as Solomon lay on his deathbed, once again in a dream, God asked the king several other questions concerning the wisdom he was given. "What would you have me do with the wisdom I gave you? Shall I store it up in my storehouses? Or shall I have beasts of the field benefit from it, or the earth spin from its axis? Shall it roam the great expanse as I wait for another like you to give it to? Or shall I hide it in plain sight for only the serious seeker to find it?" Solomon had woken from this dream with one of the gold pieces in his hand. He remembered much of the wisdom he had written on paper for his son Rehoboam, but it was only a small fraction of what Solomon's mind held. But how could other men benefit from it if they did not understand Hebrew, or even that there was a God who wished to share his wisdom with the world? Solomon sought an answer, so Solomon prayed, "Lord, do not let this wisdom die with me. If you store it up in your storehouses in heaven, what is the point in the first place to share it other than to tease men? You are not a cruel God. Even if the beasts would benefit from it, what a waste, for their lives are short and not like a man's soul or body to make sense or real use of it. You could give it to the earth or any of the stars, have it spin freely from their axes, but again, Wasted as this temporal earth does not think like an eternal man. To have it wander in the expanse, to what end, benefiting no one as it waits for another like me? Who's to say that man will come except you? And why hold it just for one man, when so many men could benefit from it? So, I ask this, do not let my wisdom die with me. If you were to hide it in plain sight, let it be where men's hearts will most likely find it, in the greed of my gold. Bless my gold with this wisdom, that it may change the heart of the man whose greed touches my gold and convicts the man through the truth of your salvation for them. And with that, King Solomon fell back into his bed and took his last breath. The gold coin rolled out of his hand and onto the ground of his bedchambers. Through time, in the holy temple Solomon had constructed for God, God had granted Solomon this final dying answer as he personally sanctified and blessed the coins containing all of Solomon's wisdom. But, because God gave Solomon so much wisdom, and saw how one man could make great progress with it for himself, where even the Queen of Sheba, known as the Queen of the South, was quite impressed with all that she had heard and even more impressed when she arrived in Israel, God knew that if he were to put all the wisdom in one coin, and it were to be possessed in the wrong hands, this could do damage beyond imagination, completely out of his will for mankind altogether. God would not allow it. God had seen how this wisdom built an empire of idols that King Solomon had consented to through the construction of temples to local gods. This affected everyone in his kingdom and resulted in God judging Israel by tearing the kingdom apart, which ultimately led to the destruction of his holy temple. In order to prevent what was meant to be a wonderful blessing from becoming a horrific curse, God decided to divide up all of Solomon's wisdom, so no one single man would be able to be as wise as Solomon and use it for great evil at the same time through one single coin. God divided Solomon's wisdom into 5 coins, each bearing one of his symbols in Hebrew. He then added a further blessing with a condition. If anyone would be willing to seek all the coins, not just one or some, but all the coins, God would grant them eternal life. This would happen only if the person's heart was covered from the blood on the coin. However, if the person's heart was not right with God Almighty, the offender would prophesy his own death and be thrown eventually straight into the darkness of an unquenchable flames of hell, forever tormented in ways even Judas Iscariot did not deserve. James found this legend at the very least compelling, another holy grail for anyone willing to find it. Either way, a very rare relic here, right now, lying on the sand, said James to himself. He felt no more alive or wiser after lightly touching the coin. For many, Solomon's gold was believed to be nothing more than a myth, a road that led an untold number of lives to early graves rather than receiving eternal life. For James, it was mythology coming to life in a rather disappointing way. It was a mystery, tied somehow to a riddle and Juan Santos's death that needed to be solved. To the high priests of Israel, and for all those that knew this legend, this gold was considered more valuable than any treasure in the world. But that wasn't what intrigued James the most. As he examined the coin, he noticed a thin film of blood had partially covered the coin. It was the blood itself that truly captured James's imagination for its unique appearance. Inexplicably, the blood was not yet dried. Somehow it was still fresh. Maybe it was Juan Santos's blood, thought James, as he further investigated the coin. The blood adhered to the coin, coagulated enough to stick to the gold, but appearing wet enough as if it had just bled out from a fresh wound. James touched the blood. Not a drop stuck to his skin, and if any of the blood seemed to rub off, it somehow was replaced when James's eyes took its attention off the coin, even for a mere split moment. Intrigued, James turned his attention to Juan Santos's hand. James removed the glove from the Admiral's right hand in order to check Santos's palm for cuts. There was no indication of any type of injury on the palms, but any evidence of blood that James did find, other than from the coin, was dried and distinctly different from the blood found on the coin. James then checked himself for any fresh cuts. He found nothing. The fact was that the blood samples, one being Santos's dried-up blood, and the other unknown, unquestionably came from 2 different sources. James knew this coin, Solomon's coin, found in the possession of someone so important, in addition to the riddle written by the Admiral himself, was no different than seeing this as a winning trifecta, reasoning this to be an opportunity he could not afford to lose. He grabbed the coin and the riddle as he felt the shift in time normalize again. The surrounding sounds of the moment came back like a wave of reality, hitting him hard. They drowned out the individual throbs of his heart. For a moment James considered he was losing his mind. That thought was interrupted, in an instant, as he suddenly felt a familiar presence show up at his door. It was Death. But now she was disguised as a brightly colored poison dart whizzing past his ear, just barely missing him. The sound of the dart traveling past him, breaking the stillness of time and silence, caught his attention. It caused him to turn around, and when he did, he saw a chaotic scene unfolding. His crew members were falling to the ground, dead or dying quickly where they fell, joining the skeletal remains of those already partially buried within the sand. "Drop your treasures and run back to the skiffs," James yelled to his crew. "Back to the skiffs." He quickly, without wasted motion, pocketed both the single gold coin and the dead man's riddle, placing them in his inner jacket for safekeeping, and got up and started to run down the beach alongside Lieutenant Keyes. They had caught up with the remaining crew members who were just as confused and frantic about the situation as James and Keyes were. It was like watching a herd of panicked horses bolting in a pack without any real thought, just a flight mentality fueled by adrenaline to run towards safety, then ask questions later. In front of James, more crew members fell from darts from the tree line and found their targets. One particular sailor had disregarded James's instruction to leave any riches behind. That sailor paid a price. As everyone on the beach retreated, other sailors who carried immeasurable wealth in their hands involuntarily dropped their chests. Moments later, those men also became victims of the darts as the sailors died from a severe paralyzation of the lungs. The surviving men who were now closer to the skiff slowed their strides, abruptly ran into the knee-high water. A few more unlucky men behind them fell when another barrage of darts hit them. By now the number of sailors had dwindled significantly, making it obvious to Lieutenant Keyes that they severely lacked manpower to row back without becoming targets themselves. "Captain, we'll never make it back to our ship alive." "Then follow me and swim for your bloody lives," James shouted, running into the water while removing his jacket and kicking off his boots. Anyone still alive at this point dropped what remaining treasures they had into the waters and began vigorously swimming for their life. Large darts with shafts made of hollow bamboo, decorated with red feathers and tips dipped in frog poisons, continued to rain over the few men left fighting for their lives as they swam to gain an edge through distance. Next to them, darts pierced the waves but missed their targets. A huge sigh of relief washed over some of the men, realizing the darts were now too far to make any difference. However, this wave of relief was short-lived when they found themselves swimming against another formidable threat. For those sailors too edged and too tired to think, the undertow would unexpectedly catch their legs, grabbing them like a hand of a sea god and dragging them to the bottom of the cove. Sailors tried to swim up for air, but the drag of the sea god's hand pulled them against their will only to force the air out of their lungs. For most caught in this dilemma, the fight proved too much, concluding the match was over long before it started and simply gave up. A watery grave was the end for those men who lost the struggle. James, by his nature, was a fighter. He was a strong swimmer and had some sense to swim parallel against the undertow when he felt one escaping, its power to pull him into certain death. With every wave, fewer and fewer of his crew survived. What seemed like an eternity of swimming eventually ended when James finally felt the bottom of a sandy shoreline floor touching his feet once again. If a man had never felt what true relief felt, this was a circumstance to provide such a strong emotion. James could not help but feel this relief and the excitement of safety as he crawled through the shallow shoreline waters towards a beach. He had survived the treacherous swim to the safety of an unusually shaped small neighboring island. In doing so, he eventually noticed the inevitable. He was the only survivor remaining. For some reason, James thought it odd that the natives didn't even attempt to swim across or follow in their own rafts. Regardless, the joy he felt by the absence of threats began to pale in comparison to the discomfort he started to experience while looking for anyone else around him. There was no sign of any of his crew or Lieutenant Keyes. This discomfort eventually caught up with fatigue. Too tired to fully grasp his situation and too exhausted, James collapsed on the beach, letting his world go black. Chapter 1. Part 2, Turtle Island. Sniff. Sniff. James felt a lick on his face. A cold, wet black nose continued to press against James's cheek as he slowly opened his eyes. Curious deep brown eyes, positioned directly above him, stared unapologetically into James's blue, yet hazy, eyes. It was now midday, and the heat of the sun could be felt burning against James's skin. A particularly handsome black and white border collie continued to look down inquisitively, wagging its tail slowly as James laid there halfway in and halfway out of the water. A calm, warm breeze swept through the trees, blowing past the two of them, giving some cool relief to James's burned skin. "If you're going to eat me, do it now, boy. I'm ready to die," weakly James said submissively. Confused, the dog looked at James with the typical border collie intense hard eye stare at him for a moment, and then licked his sunburned face once again. The amiable dog then stopped and laid down next to James. Now more awake, James felt the sensation of gentle waves around his feet. For the first time in a very long time, he experienced a kind of a gentle peace as he laid there relaxed, looking up into the sky. His body had sunk into the sand, leaving James surprisingly comfortable. The once strong waves were now quieted, while they continued to play gently around his feet as they soothed him in a pool of bath-warm water. But as quickly as the peace came, so did an unorthodox sight up in the air. A black raven could be seen high in the sky circling above him and the dog. "No, it can't be," thought James, as his briefly calmed nerves jolted abruptly back into anxiety. He sat up, fixing his eyes intently on the black raven, making sure it wasn't the raven but just another common raven. The confirmation came when the bird's circular flight path flew past a background of large billows of smoke, far off in long streams of ugly shades of grays and blacks. The smoky ribbons ran through the clear and stunning blue skies like a rip cutting through a perfectly good canvas. This raven was the first sign of trouble and was every sailor's nightmare. It meant certain death was on its way and the only warning you would receive, giving you little time, if any, to prepare for what was coming next. Seasoned sailors, who had a few run-ins with this bird and survived to tell their stories, naturally warned every other sailor at every port or tavern of this circling black raven that was too high to shoot, but low enough to make men tremble in their boots with fear. It was the way this bird circled that distinguished it from just any common black raven, always circling where death was thinking of striking next. In fact, every time at sea this raven circled a ship, the odds of that ship running out of luck was high, very high. This bird became so well known for what came next that whole towns would tremble, unsure if they should flee, fight, or simply wait for the trouble to pass by them. Some locals became so superstitious and/or paranoid that they literally would go around town and kill every black bird that was unlucky enough to cross their path. This not only caused criticism in some towns, but actually invited pirates to those same fear-filled hubs, giving the pirates an opportunity to stage their own black birds and further cause hysteria. The mayhem that followed made it that much easier for pirates to rape and pillage a port town. Only folks clever enough to distinguish between this black raven and any random black raven could literally calm a town or send it into flames of fear. James's eyes followed the smoke from its source. He could make out a ship being consumed by fire, slowly sinking to the bottom of the sea. It was his ship, the HMS Sea Runner. "No, no, no," James yelled, standing upright, waving his hands frantically in the air as if he could stop the calamity unfolding before him. The black raven suddenly changed its course and flew off in the distance. As the bird flew, it became less and less indistinguishable in the sky, slowly blending in between the blurred lines of the atmosphere and the black soot, ash-field smoke to eventually disappear altogether into the darkness. Most 18th century warships in general, even ablaze and under heavy cannon fire, were difficult to sink. Often when a ship surrendered, it was due to being crippled in maneuverability and/or overwhelmed by the enemy forces with few, if any, casualties. Rarely did full-size ship of the line model productions or frigates sink. For many captains, the real challenge was forcing an enemy's ship to surrender while keeping it intact. The ship needed to remain in somewhat good condition, and its provisions, if it were to be regarded as a possible prize. When a ship did go down, it was often weather-related, such as hurricanes. Other causes included hull damage from a collision like running aground, or a fault in its design, such as in the case of the Mary Rose. In 1545, during battle, water found its way over the waterline of the ship and filled the open gun ports. This caused the Mary Rose to tip over and sink. To sink a ship like the HMS Sea Runner, a triple-decker workhorse housing 800 men and 100 gun ports, took immense firepower and firepower force determination fueled by hatred. She was built to withstand most enemies of England, and was not an easy ship to sink. While watching this perfectly crafted war machine descend, James's dismal reality hit him, his heart sinking with the ship. He was overcome with a despair such as he never before felt. If there had been a gun nearby, he might have considered ending his life at that moment. God, James imagined, was positioning him to witness his own downfall from the safety of an island. To James, it was like he was watching some soap opera or play where he was both the audience and the actor. The horrifying plot only seemed to worsen as the drama progressed. James watched from a distance the final traces of the ship disappearing under the waves. James sat back and sank to his knees, his face looking up into the sky in dread. He turned his gaze back into the horizon, watching the smoke slowly dissipate as there was nothing left to burn. The black and white border collie, unfazed by all of this, just sat there next to James. "I envy you, dog. You don't know what real loss, misery, and hopelessness feels like, do you? How did you even get here?" asked James while searching for a name tag on the dog's red collar. Finding no identification, James continued to speak to his only remaining living soul around him. "Maybe Lieutenant Ryan Keyes was right. Maybe this is the end of us. All this time I thought my fate would end within some fierce storm at sea, a tempest that sends me from this world to the next as a hero, my legendary exploits to be recounted in books for the whole world to read, my reputation as a fearless sailor, even at death, and as having lived a life full of adventure would inspire many at sea. I would leave a legacy, a tale worth telling where my children would be proud of me." But instead, James found himself slumped to the ground, starting to sob. "Alas, no. This is not the fate that awaits me. Instead, I will die in a place known to no one, known not even to His Royal Majesty. I'm as lost as the ship I came here to find. Imagine that. Here I am, thousands of miles away from home, without family, without friends. To make matters worse, I now find myself without a ship, provisions, a crew, or even a paddle. I literally had everything this morning, and by this evening I have nothing. All I have is my mind, and I fear I am losing that too. I guess even the sun sets in paradise." James closed his eyes, tears streaming down the face of a once prideful man, now humbled in ways he never could have conceived. After allowing himself a short cry, James opened his red, slightly swollen eyes with the remaining tears traveling their way down his chin. Emma, my Emma, was right about this life ending in rough, unexpected, and unsatisfying ways, James thought to himself. I've gone my whole life doing what I thought was always right and honorable, yet at every turn it led me down the road to inevitable ruin. How can this be? It's as if fate itself orchestrated my life from the beginning to fail at every turn, despite my best. Pausing a moment to reflect, James continued his musings. My beloved Emma prayed every night to a God that failed her in her time of need, and now she's dead. She was such a good person, she didn't deserve what happened. When alive, never did she get upset when things didn't go as she wished. She simply trusted it was God's will, citing Romans 8:28. All things work together for the good of them who love God. To support her unwavering belief. Trust God, she probably would say if she was sitting with me here right now. Once more, James turned back to the dog to see if he was even paying attention. The dog laid next to him, with only his tail swishing in the sand the moment James made eye contact with him. Emma would offer me encouragement whenever things went wrong, telling me, "James, all you need to do is believe. Have faith that, even on your worst of days, in the worst of storms, everything is going to be just fine as long as you keep God with you. If you believe, then God can make the possible in the impossible better than you can imagine. God has the power to calm your agonizing internal storms." James paused once more, then continued. Never did she realize just how impossible or how bad things can get. Then, just like a slow pot reaching its climax suddenly boiling over, James raged in frustration as he yelled out to the sea. "Well, everything is not bloody fine now, love, is it? Where is God in all of this?" As soon as he finished his outburst, his calm demeanor returned, and he continued as if nothing had happened. "I believe in God, my love. I just don't believe He loves me enough to take a personal interest in me through all my trials, if they indeed are trials, or just going through bad decisions that seemed they were right at the time. As far as I can recall, He never seems to answer my prayers despite my sincerity and good intention, nor does God give me any signs of His presence and supposed love for me. In all of His power, why can't He just show up and talk to me in person, giving me the evidence I need, direction and certainty to make it through my storms without any worry and doubt? I pray to a God that won't talk back. I would full-heartedly give my life to the God you believe in, only if He would show me His love in a personal way, in a way beyond what the Bible says. If only He would reveal His love in such a way that I alone could understand, that would show me not only is He real, but He cares enough about me to be personal. I could follow that God with everything I am. It was then James realized for the first time that he truly yearned to understand this particular God. He continued as if Emma was sitting on the beach next to him, listening. No, God does not show such intimacy towards me. It's absolutely frustrating when you speak of a loving God when all I see is evidence of a silent, invisible God. It feels like he keeps the answers I need to get close to him a closely guarded secret. This certainly feels cruel more than loving. Because of God's silence, I sometimes feel like sinning is the only way to get his attention. Folly to be certain that doesn't seem to work. By now the sun had positioned itself in the midday sky, giving off the most intense heat of the day. James continued his conversation as if he were still talking to Emma sitting next to him. Emma, you repeatedly told me, you feel but the word says. You feel abandoned, but the word says that he will never leave me nor forsake me. You feel unloved, but the word says while I was a sinner, Christ demonstrated his unconditional love for me on the cross. You feel when I pray he's not listening, but the word says he hears the cries of his children. You feel, but the word says. You feel, but the word says. Only if it were that easy, my love. These words flow easily when a person is not the one going through the trials I have endured. Challenges I have faced belie your unpretentious approach to life. Sometimes I believe my feelings are the only legitimate real things I have. James sobbed again while the dog simply sat, unmoved and unbothered by James's passionate display. As a short time passed, James once again found himself looking to the horizon where his ship had sunk. He couldn't help but notice how beautiful and alive this hellish paradise was. For all of the island's myths and horrors, the beach where James sat was anything but dangerous and full of savagery. There were no half-beaten skulls buried in this sand, no burned trees, or anything whatsoever to give the slightest hint of true danger. There was just a pleasant aroma and reassuring silence on this turtle-filled island. A warm breeze blew over him and the dog as they sat under the shade of the coconut trees. It was this pleasantness and peace that so few sailors would glaze over in conversation on these islands that gave it the feel of paradise. Most of the conversations dominated the negative aspects of this place, and who could blame the sailors? It was hell in paradise on all the other islands in the ring. Maybe there was something wrong with this particular haven as well, something that he hadn't discovered yet. The situation reminded James of a time during his more immature years. He remembered a relationship he once had with a beautiful woman who turned out to be really despicable. This relationship shook him to his core when that ended. Then, he had found another beauty who was the complete opposite. It felt almost too good to be true, so James kept looking for flaws in her, an irrational act of sabotage on his part. When no flaws were found, he unconsciously made up faults and shortcomings. This inevitably drove the two apart. No one was perfect per se, but this woman was a perfect match for James. As he matured, he realized his foolishness of attributing characteristics to her that weren't actually a part of her. Based on those past experiences, James now tried to see the world as it really was, not adding or subtracting to anything unless required and fair. It was this attitude of accepting people only for who they were, seeing places for what they really were, as well as how he fit into people's lives, that led to significantly fewer heartbreaks and disappointments. In this way, he developed a deeper love and appreciation for what was in front of him at any given moment. Most of the time, even when life presented him with time to develop this wisdom, James could not help but override that which so often kept him grounded. He would then find himself off track and in situations he was never meant to experience or feel. It was only then that life, in its whims, threw an anchor into the depths of James's heart. This forced him to stop and think of what was important and just to accept things for what they were. It was only at those times that he found peace. The practice of being grounded was something with which James internally struggled with. He tried to make it a regular habit, especially when he felt he was completely falling apart, enjoying the peace when it came. The thought of, I am still alive and not in hell, was a huge grounding anchor for James. The notion that money lost could be recovered and lost love could be found again were also all grounding anchors for him. This ultimately kept him from wanting to end his life when things became unbelievably difficult. James had always thought of human life in terms of ranges and cycles that dependably corrected for error, even completely resetting a man's perspective if necessary. If something moved too far to the left, it would correct to the right. If something moved too far to the right, it would correct to the left. History was no exception to this, as war was an extreme version of these corrections that resulted from tyranny, greed, or any number of wicked aspects of man. The quote that rang true for James was, "Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times." It resonated in James's heart on the occasion when he felt he had pushed too hard in one direction or another in his personal life. Where death was always tempting James to cross over the point of no return, life stood there as a guardrail out of its mercy and love, guiding him back into the right path where he was always destined to be. Today, after death tried so hard to push James over the edge of insanity by taking everything left he had up into flames, life once again felt compelled to isolate James and literally sit him down. Life had again shown him the beauty that death was so quick to miss or cover up on this island, a beauty that most sailors missed. But at the moment, James wasn't interested in the lesson life was offering. James focused his attention on scanning the horizon for any hopes of rescue, unrealistic the odds were. Whenever a time arrived when life was ready to sit James down, it only used his desires as bait to show him what he really needed to see at that moment. In this specific situation, the thing James needed to see was physically in front of him. He needed an overall perspective from a distance of what the islands truly were for a purpose that life was going to reveal to him later. Oh, how clever life was in its methods when it wanted something without forcing itself or imposing on a man's free will. It was completely opposite those of death's methods. While James continued to look out into the horizon, he had never really noticed this level of vivid detail before. The water was ultra clean and crystal blue, filled with glittering tints of sea greens and turquoises. Large and small translucent gems, untouched by men, lay scattered on the cove's sandy floor. These gems were emerald stones that contained the perfect combination of chalcedony and chrysolite. When the sun's rays hit them, the gems would light up the whole seafloor for miles, giving light to even some of the darkest parts of the seafloor. This allowed life to flourish in even the most inhospitable parts of the sea. The image was truly something mesmerizing. Unlike many of the Southeast Asian countries he had visited through his naval career, James noticed that here everything was far more varied both in color and in the species of plants and animals he saw in the water. He was aware that his senses, particularly his vision, were far keener here. He could look down in the sea and see clearly for many hundreds of feet. Brilliant hues of pink, red, purple, blue, and orange danced before him as the tides ebbed and flowed. Gold colors of sands, gems, rocks, reefs, and corals he had never seen before appeared alive. Everything seemed blended in a harmony designed to complement each other, despite their contrasts, creating a grand piece of artwork in living motion. Past the long stretches of empty sand patches underneath the sea, large schools of tropical fish foreign to the rest of the world swarmed the reefs further out to sea. It was obvious that the reefs, along with large, jagged rocks that resembled mountaintop peaks protruding from the sea floor, made up an individual oasis within the sea desert, where the wildlife thrived. In the same area, a complex ecosystem of various breathtaking sea creatures and mammals was easily viewed. Some of the mammals, such as sharks and small whales, were familiar to James, while others, like the white bottlenose dolphin, were a novelty. One such reptile-mammal mix looked like a water dragon with 4 fins, a long neck, and red dun stripe running down the entire length of its back. The rest of the body was covered in black scales, with hints of a sage-green metallic scaly undercoat that could only be seen when the sunlight hit at a specific angle. A rare find indeed, James thought to himself. This creature looked like a descendant of a prehistoric reptile that long ago had flourished in the 7 seas, and now was confined to these tropical waters. It was said to be extinct, or at the very least unknown to the rest of the world, and barely, if ever, mentioned in archaeology history books. As the sun continued to move over the sky, James continued to search the horizon for any hopes of rescue. His eyes came across a rugged mountaintop standing in the middle of a ring of islands. The biggest and most impressive of these islands had a larger-than-average volcano in its center covered in tropical green foliage within a massive redwood-dense forest. These redwoods, adapted for such a humid and hot climate, were even thicker, taller, and older than the great Japanese cypress trees or the California redwoods. The volcano itself remained dormant for some time and wasn't naturally going to erupt anytime soon. Lush vines of many varying types, shades, sizes, and colors extended well past the volcano and clung to the cliffs. Crystal waterfalls cascaded down, Some big and mighty, more than 200 feet tall. Others were shorter and gentler. All were stunningly beautiful. The waters of varying falls turned to different colors depending on the angle of the sun at the particular time of day. In the early morning, the water would change from colorless to a pinkish salmon color. At midday, a beautiful sapphire blue color would appear. As evening approached, the water would turn a golden hue, giving the waterfall the appearance of a spectacular lava flow. But these slivers of paradise comprised only a part of James's experience. The physical air James breathed was extraordinarily natural and pure. It felt as if the air alone could sustain a person all day, requiring no other form of nourishment. Curiously, the air somehow felt lighter and simultaneously seemed to have a higher oxygen content. Breathing it was the main source of his supernaturally physical heightened senses. However, with these positive attributes, James discovered there were also negative aspects to these as well. Just as anything beautiful in this idyllic environment was perceived as the apex of beauty, anything ugly also was perceived at its most extreme. Pain, for example, was felt exponentially. James's sunburn was not exempt from this, nor were the intensity of the storms. When a storm hit these islands, it was always far worse than anything James had encountered in England, the Asian Oceans, or even the Caribbean. What made these storms worse was how they affected his head. Every time the atmospheric pressure changed, James developed an excruciating headache, often with nausea and red vomit following. There was also something odd James had noticed about the role time played here in the physical. Curiously, time served as a true blessing or as a true curse. 1 minute time could stand still, the next it raced towards something no one was ready for without any known explanation. There was no middle ground. These islands offered the potential for the greatest reward imaginable as well as the greatest risk. James experienced both ends of the spectrum depending on the time of the day. It was most unusual, but James felt that it was only here, in this land of dichotomy, that someone could discover where their heart, in the sight of God, truly was. The contrast was so striking that James often wondered to himself if he may be imagining this entire reality. Maybe, he considered, he was in the back rooms or caverns of his mind, unable to escape an imagined fantasy that was so real to him. Questions nagged at him. Am I actually going crazy? How is this place even real? Did I split my head somewhere and not remember what happened, now impaired mentally? I know I am not dead in the sense of heaven and hell, so where am I, really, where am I? James then looked up, saw familiar constellations, and recognized the general area of his location. I am somewhere in the southern hemisphere. Well, that's no help at all. Abruptly, the thought of the single gold coin and riddle came to the forefront of James's attention as he stood up, panicked while frantically patting down his pants pockets searching for the coin and the paper with the riddle. "Oh no, my jacket!" cried a distraught James, as he realized he had discarded it in order to swim more efficiently away from the natives shooting darts at him and the crew. As if the day couldn't get worse. That morning, in contrast, James had everything. He had found the lost ship, its admiral, and the chests of Spanish treasures. The island, however, had stayed true to its nature, that of great rewards often being accompanied by risks of greater disappointments. By midday, James had lost everything. In fact, it was far more than he ever could have dreamed of at that time. Now, as a final blow, the coin and the riddle were gone with his jacket. He was so preoccupied with the weight of loss, despair setting within him like the sun on the horizon, that he failed to see a ship with black flags approaching. The vessel made its way towards James, but not for a rescue. Then it turned into the direction from where James had begun his swim. James recognized that ship and its captain. At that moment, despair gave birth to anger and fury as James's eyes glazed with a burning hate at seeing the silhouette of the ship. Damn you, McMahon, you have taken everything from me. I will get my rightful revenge on you." "So help me God," yelled James. He hopelessly watched some of that ship's pirates salvage the floating remnants of his ship's cargo. The rest of the pirates were scouring the beach for any treasures that remained. The pirates were so preoccupied with gathering their finds, they either didn't notice James or didn't care to pursue him. After some time, when darkness had settled in, James watched the lights of the ship sail out of sight. His defeat seemed complete. Once the pirate ship was out of view and the sun offered no more light, James headed towards the only refuge available at the time, the coconut trees. There he sat under the trees, looking up at the night's stars, half naked, half sunburned, and full of uncertainty for everything in his life. How did things come to this? Wondered James as he watched a turtle walk past him. My life was so good, and now, My fate is no different than Santos's. I'm here alone on this god-forsaken, cursed ring of islands, left to die. Death, the greatest equalizer, where all the kings and pawns go back in the same box. I hate this part of the game. Unable to contain himself anymore, James's emotions burst, and he got up and threw a tantrum in protest of his predicament. He kicked his feet furiously while his hands hurled beach sand to new heights. His outburst did nothing to assuage his internal turmoil. The turtle walking past James now picked up the pace and disappeared into the water. After his fit was over, he sat down under the trees. James now felt emotionally exhausted and utterly isolated. He was ashamed of his behavior and was glad there had been no witnesses. James knew he was admired by his crew for his composed, calm, and relaxed demeanor, even in the most intense situations, but this was more than he could bear. James took a moment to gather his wits as he looked over and saw the black and white border collie still sitting next to him calmly. The dog just stared out to sea as if pretending he didn't even notice James's rational emotional explosion of the past few minutes. The dog knew something, and James could feel it. Something was coming, a mystery yet to be revealed, and only the dog knew its truth. Still, that wasn't enough of a comfort and required far more faith than James was prepared to muster at the time. Rather than stop feeling sorry for himself, he found it much easier at the moment to just dwell on his miserable existence. He was certain these actions were more than justifiable. Other than the dog next to him, he was truly alone on an uncharted island, far from any major trade route. He believed his crew had perished with his ship. He had no method of transport, and he had no supplies. James was surrounded by a chain of beautiful but cursed tropical islands that carried the promise of death, and rather than the fearless sailor he fancied himself to be, James was now on the verge of a complete mental and emotional collapse. Exhausted by the blistering sun beating him down relentlessly earlier in the day, and experiencing the debilitating effects of dehydration, there was only one thing he felt he was capable of doing, and that was to go to sleep. Chapter 1. Part 3. Edwards de Luc McMahon. James Hemsworth suddenly was jolted awake as a bucket of seawater hit his face. He realized he had slept much of the next day recovering, and found it to be approaching evening again. He felt the sting of the salt in his eyes, in his sore lips, and all over his sensitive sunburned skin. James found himself aboard the very pirate ship that was the object of his revenge, as was its captain. Instead of capturing the ship, James was now its prisoner, detained and bound to a black-painted wooden mast. Standing over James was a stout, strongly built, 5 feet 8 inches captain, dressed in water-resistant black leathers, with a pitch-black beard to match. Tattoos, whose symbolism gave chills to anyone who knew their true meaning, ran down his face, neck, arms wrapping around his fingers, and provided a portrait of his adventures and achievements decorating the canvas of his body. His torso was outlined with pistols and sheathed cutlass sabers. An elegant black hat sat upon his head, and upon his shoulder stood a particular black raven named Scourge that was responsible for so much of the fear instilled in sailors and portside villagers alike. Standing next to the legs of the pirate himself, the same black and white border collie who once sat next to James, now stood obediently at the formidable pirate's feet. Edwards de Luc McMahon had a reputation of unmatched villainy and cunningness. His exploits were well known around the world. Rumors of his viciousness struck fear into the heart of even the bravest of sailors. Blackbeard, even with his accomplishments as one of the most notorious pirates who ever lived, paled in comparison to McMahon and his unmatched infamy. In fact, McMahon was so feared that there was a pause during the 7 Years' War between Britain and France and their respective allies. To put it in perspective, the 7 Years' War was really the first global war in history. In the early months of 1759, Britain and France, both greatly irritated by McMahon, had agreed to stop fighting each other, put the world on pause by signing a temporary peace treaty, and each dedicated resources to finding and killing McMahon. The bounty on McMahon was 100 times that of Blackbeard's, as McMahon was becoming the driving force behind the golden age of piracy. A large number of privateers and smaller warships were assigned to capture McMahon, but mysteriously none ever returned. But during the hunt, McMahon became somewhat overwhelmed with the hordes of ships pursuing. These same pirate hunters made it that much more difficult when they killed many of his allies. With this, McMahon knew it was just a matter of time before his end would come just as well. He realized he needed to quickly divert attention off him and back to the tensions in the colonies. He knew friction in key elements between the English and the French would result in them attacking each other, breaking their temporary and unheard-of peace agreement, making it much more difficult to hunt him. Quebec, the capital of New France, would be the perfect target to where he could get them to fight each other once more. Through his reliable contacts, McMahon knew many of France's troops were assigned for duty in continental Europe. This limited France's ability for quick reinforcements abroad. He also knew whoever controlled Quebec controlled New France's empire and its colonies in North America, where much of the tensions between England and France existed. As a consequence, McMahon sailed his vessel, disguised as a Portuguese merchant ship, up the St. Lawrence River to Quebec. There he blew up vital supply lines to both British and French forces, assigned blame to each country for the damages, and helped both sides pin each other down in areas ripe for combat. Reportedly, on September 13, 1759, the temporary peace treaty was completely ignored, history disregarding this as the event triggering the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. The battle's outcome was the French were defeated in the span of 30 minutes, and the fate of New France was decided. McMahon quickly disappeared before the truth could ever come out. After 3 years of hiding within the Northwest Territories, McMahon sailed out of the Great Lakes, down the St. Lawrence River, and witnessed the aftermath of what became of the New France Empire through the lens of Quebec. While continuing to the Atlantic Ocean, he never intended to reveal the truth behind the fall of Quebec. Despite his renown as an evil and vicious pirate, he sailed cautiously as he tested his luck and reputation. No one opposed him, and soon he realized the world had stopped chasing him. McMahon then painted his ship back to her original solid raven black colors. After he'd gone missing for those 3 years, everyone, to their great relief, thought he was dead. During those 3 years, McMahon and his crew spread the rumor that his ship sank, and everyone aboard was lost at sea. This deceit only helped England and France forget about McMahon entirely as they got deeper into their own conflicts in North America. Despite both countries becoming unwilling to divert any more valuable military assets to piracy, McMahon's death was credited as the beginning of the downfall of the golden age of piracy. But, when McMahon returned, his image of immortality had grown to a new level of fear. Rumors of pirates rising from the dead and returning in unsinkable solid wooden black ships fueled McMahon's unstoppable reputation. People everywhere wondered, who else could stop the world in its tracks and still sail the seas freely? Only Edward de Luc McMahon. Through McMahon's reappearance, cunningness, and just pure luck, his peers and enemies bestowed on him the title of pirate, a title that elevated him above any pirate lord or pirate king. In fact, unlike pirate lords or pirate kings, of whom there were many, there could only be one true pirate Khan in all of history. This title of a Khan was derived from the history of Genghis Khan and his ruthless exploits conquering almost a third of Asia and parts of Eastern Europe, making it the largest contiguous land empire in world history. McMahon's clever ploy in Quebec that ruined the fate of one empire while elevating another was the one significant event that changed Edward's title as to how the world viewed him, and more importantly, feared him. Instead of revealing the truth of his exploits in Quebec, knowing rumors were quick to find itself out the door and truth was slow to put on its shoes, he circulated another rumor that convinced people he had made a pact in blood with the devil himself. The unholy covenant was that McMahon, deceased, rose from the dead, and now through the powers of Satan had the powers of storms in his hand to will men's fate in the seas as he sought it, ultimately becoming the unstoppable pirate. However, the new King of England, George III, through his faith, was not persuaded. He didn't believe in such powers, in devils, or in immortal pirates. He only believed that God, under the Church of England, had the power to resurrect men from the dead. So, on the Crown's behalf and the Church of England, heresy in a pirate was more than enough to continue to seek the capture of the pirate, even if England no longer garnished the support of the rest of the fearful world. King George III then assigned the finest admiral of the fleet, Lord Juan Santos Nelson, to lead the mission for the purpose of making a quick end to this Khan. The plan was that, following McMahon's capture, the king's attention would return to the American colonies. Admiral Juan Santos was to command the best ship available at the time, the HMS Revenge. She was similar in design to her sister ship, the HMS Sea Runner, James Hemsworth's ship. Despite all of George's efforts to hunt down McMahon and his ship, the Corvus, McMahon remained elusive, always 3 steps ahead of the Revenge. The relentless pursuit continued until Juan Santos and his ship mysteriously disappeared without a trace. This disappearance produced a level of fear in the hearts of even the most hardened bounty hunters and privateers willing to join the hunt. If Juan Santos, a top-level admiral, had failed, they knew their chance of success was not worth the risk. They immediately abandoned their manhunt for McMahon. Upon hearing the news back in England, George was furious and hung the bounty hunters for treason against the royal crown. This prompted England to change tactics and appoint a new captain to go after the pirate. King George knew he faced a daunting task of replacing Juan Santos. He felt no one was qualified for the task, and something had to change. The king subsequently reformed a committee specifically to address all pirate activities. The question he posed to the committee was, who's most qualified to replace the Admiral Sir Juan Santos and continue the manhunt for McMahon? The committee members agreed there was no man better for the job than James Ryan Hemsworth. George felt in his heart this was his best bet. However, there was one complication. At the time, James was imprisoned for murder. You, croaked James in a voice scratchy from the elements. He was overcome by shock and disgust simultaneously. Just when I thought I had hit rock bottom, here you are, the notorious pirate McMahon, showing me that there is a new bottom to hit. Let's just get this done. If I am not currently dead and in Davy Jones's locker, go ahead and kill me. Fate is a funny thing, mate, said McMahon philosophically. Life is karma, as those Eastern religions remind me, a cycle as it were. You're not dead yet, but judging by the looks and smell of you, you're quite close to it. The sea is not yet ready for you, try as she may to acquire your soul. But Davy Jones's locker? Now that's questionable. At this point, Captain McMahon opened a bottle of rum that he slid out from the inside of his jacket and took a long, satisfied swig. Care for a real man's drink, sailor? McMahon asked. Water? James's mouth was so dry from the salt he could barely talk by this point. Very well. Master Beckett, fetch our guest some water, ordered McMahon. The quartermaster took a bucket of seawater, and, as he did when waking James's moments ago, casually, mockingly, dumped it on James. Welcome back, James. You should have accepted the rum. McMahon and the rest of the crew laughed as James experienced firsthand a small taste for what he thought was to come from this crew. Then McMahon's men unbounded James from the black mast, helped him get up on his feet, and cut the ropes that bound his hands. The unbinding proved to be uneventful. The crew, one by one, disappointed at the absence of drama, disappeared to the task assigned to them. Two big and bulky crew members continued to stand over James, who was now face to face with McMahon. I say, you have a remarkable talent for staying alive, Captain Hemsworth. In fact, it is this uncanny ability of yours to not stay dead that convinces me you're the reason why I am here. It is also the reason I drink to excess. Now free of his restraints, James formed a fist. The two crew members acting as guards easily intercepted James's feeble swing as he tried to strike the pirate. Damn you. I will kill you, mark my words. You deserve nothing but pain and death. James articulated his words with as much venom as he could muster. His determination was strong, but his strength and voice were spent. McMahon addressed James. Contrary to what you and others believe, I'm not the monster, you are. That, however, is not the reason why we are here. It's not even the reason I brought you on deck. I could have just let you die on that ridiculously large turtle shell island from which I plucked you from, but I didn't. Which, by the way, I find very amusing. But anyhow, I am beginning to understand now that it's all about timing here. Letting you die right now hasn't worked in the past. I also understand that your unquenchable thirst for revenge against me doesn't solve anything in these particular cycles. Likewise, my killing you repeatedly fails to benefit me in any fashion. McMahon walked into James's personal space and stopped so close that James could smell the foul rum off his breath. The pirate pointed to a sailor working the deck. In fact, ask any of these scallywags, and every one of them would. Insist I am the least religious of them all, but this whole reincarnation thing has got me really thinking. Edwards paused and took another hearty swig of rum. McMahon had become immune to the alcohol's effects. It was as if it were water to McMahon, and he drank the grog with no impairment. I'm starting to believe maybe this is hell. Or the beginning of one for me, a certain degree in hell that only seems to get worse with every cycle, if you will. Maybe purgatory, or perhaps Davy Jones' locker. Some days I think I am in a dream, a nightmare that I cannot escape, or a vision. Whatever this delusion or situation, I can't quite make sense of this whole reality. They might as well have named this place as the land of the lost and confused. I don't even know if you exist. McMahon then poked James hard on his sunburned skin, as if to confirm that James indeed was real. James groaned in response. Or, maybe there is something bigger than the both of us. Possibly it's our destiny to find the answer together as temporary partners. We might be a pair doomed to move from one existence to another on a higher plane or reality, as the religions of enlightenment assert. It seems that your demand for revenge and for my bloodshed prevents any solution of breaking free from this strange limbo-like world. It feels like we are living on the edge of insanity, yet it fools us into thinking we are somehow still operating in paradise. So let's come up with a better result, shall we? I have a proposition, offered McMahon as he swung his arms around with the bottle of rum like a drunk. James looked at McMahon as if he had lost his mind. What in the world are you talking about? Do you hear yourself speaking these foolish, mad words? They make no sense at all, proclaimed James as he shifted his body, testing the guards hold over him. McMahon continued to explain. James, you and I have the same problem. There's a storm coming. I've sailed through many storms so severe that most men's hearts fail them when encountering the wind and waves, the very same conditions at which I would only sneer, often using the tempest for my gain. Together, there was nothing my ship and I could not successfully navigate. You see, nothing in our natural world scares me. Not you, not the sea, not the storms, nor the gods who bring the storms. Never mind the fact I can't fully kill you, this place is unnatural, and the storms here have got me stirred. This next storm, it's one I fear I cannot survive. If this next one isn't the end of me, then the next storm after that one certainly will be my death. These storms come like the birth pains of a woman as she's getting ready to deliver her child. The storms come one after another, and the time between storms decreases each time, while each storm increases in strength. It won't be long before a storm gets the best of both of us, but to birth what? Our destruction? Is the storm's purpose to destroy our lives and everyone on this ship, the islands and the world as we know it? McMahon paused for a minute, then continued to speak once he regained his composure, noticeably more sober in tone. On the beach, before you jumped into the water to escape the Ducati's darts, you dropped your jacket, and, in those pockets, I found damaged paper. I know it contained the riddle on it. In one pocket I also found a single gold coin, covered in this living yet unnatural blood. I'm convinced these items together will give us the solution to this particular problem, to our problem. James was incredulous at the mere thought of working with the despicable McMahon, the most offensive excuse imaginable for a human being supposedly made in the image of God. James's jaw was clenched when he spoke. You're responsible for the death of my wife Emma and my children. How can I ever forgive a monster like you and help you of all people? Clearly you've gone mad. Master Beckett, remind our good captain what has changed in this cycle, instructed McMahon as he pointed his index finger up into the sky. The skies, the lands, and the sea all have changed. Their colors have completely faded and have not come back for some time now, reported Beckett, as if this explained everything. McMahon patiently tried to clarify. James, you're so focused on yourself exacting revenge for what happened to Emma, your children, and your career, that you are blinded to everything else going on here and now, where it matters. Your past doesn't need you, it's your present that does. I need you fully in These's current moments. McMahon, if you think I am going to, began James. Without warning, McMahon's fist punched aggressively into James's stomach, interrupting his thoughts. James fell to one of his knees and moaned from the pain. Do not interrupt me, McMahon said in an aggravated tone. I'm getting irritated, and perhaps a little irrational, because I know time is running out for us all. Stay quiet and kindly let me finish, McMahon continued to explain, trying to be somewhat professional. Years ago, England made an agreement with you to pardon you for murdering a nobleman by the name of Robert Smith. The pardon would occur only if you solve the mystery of what happened to HMS Revenge and her Admiral Juan Santos. At the same time, you were required to hunt down my crew and I. Now, as unbelievable as it may seem, you and I find ourselves, against our wishes, in this unnatural world. Right now, we are forced to work together, not fight each other. There will be a time and a place for that later, but not at this moment. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, is it not? I choose sanity, and therefore, we need to try a different approach to solve the riddle and the mystery of these islands. Since during each cycle you seem to have no recollection of our past exploits, you still refuse to adapt as I have. It's imperative that you come to your senses and recognize our current reality. You must try and remember something. If this pattern of the storm's intensity increasing with every cycle continues, eventually we will encounter the perfect storm, and even my superior navigational skills won't save us. This storm will kill every last one of us unless we join forces and solve our problem together to get out of here before it all kills us. You're stubbornly stuck in the past. You can't, or won't, even acknowledge the most obvious change, this unsettling world without color. James had in fact noticed the lack of color. Ignorant of medicine, James initially believed he had a slow onset of colorblindness. All his signs and symptoms of colorblindness first appeared whenever he felt nauseous. It was as if the nausea turned on and off the color receptors in his eyes. One minute he could see normally in full color, the next minute, shades of greens and reds disappeared. At other times, James saw no colors at all other than whites, blacks, and shades of grays. Randomly or after a good night's rest, he could see all the colors normally. He sought an explanation for this odd occurrence. If a concussion was the cause, he certainly couldn't remember it. The situation confounded him. James could not understand it, but for the sake of his own crew, kept it to himself. This time, something on this ship was clearly different. As James looked around, again he saw a colorless world. He considered that his theory about his condition was actually wrong, and it wasn't an imaginary condition inside his head. After all, McMahon's crew had confirmed that they too saw the world go colorless, so how could it just be in James's head? What about the nausea and the changes in his vision that followed? One thing was certain. These islands did not provide clarity, which was what everyone at the moment needed the most. Everyone on McMahon's ship had a theory, but no concrete evidence as to what the color blindness meant. According to McMahon's quartermaster Beckett, the strange condition was a disease that everyone picked up from a common source, water. He also felt that everyone on board shared the disease attribute in some invisible web-like network connecting everything together. The network determined when it would turn the colors on and off, and in what degree. It was a theory the crew generally mocked. Another theory proposed by McMahon's cook Alan was that the world itself was losing color. Therefore no one on board was actually afflicted by a sea-borne curse. Other members of the crew swore it was a form of judgment, and the world would end in absolute darkness. But no one was certain where it originated, nor how everyone was affected by it simultaneously. Regardless of one's viewpoint, the unusual storms and the colorless world fueled an utter fear and urgency in McMahon to solve the dead man's riddle. James spoke after some time. "If you think I can cure this condition, you are grievously wrong. Even if I could, I wouldn't. Besides, the riddle on that paper is completely illegible. So what now?" James followed up that statement by spitting in McMahon's face with absolute hatred. "Ah yes, the riddle. Master Beckett, please recite the riddle," instructed McMahon. His arm threatened to punch James again but changed course instead as his fist connected with his face to wipe off James's spit. Beckett proceeded to recite the riddle from memory word for word. "A glorious treasure of bright, gleaming gold, none can buy a cure, yet 5 pieces are sold. The blood tells the truth, revealing the key. Then all will be healed and thus be set free, facing a dilemma and a warning foretold. Time is running out as the storm is growing cold. Those who want to save their life certainly will fail. They who lose their life for me, in the end, prevail." For emphasis, again I say that I am not a religious man in the general sense of the word, but James, even I recognize a riddle with a biblical reference. Matthew 16:25 states, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." It may surprise you that I looked it up in the Bible I keep in my quarters. I also have the Quran, Jewish, and the Vedas text next to my bed. And so far none of those have been any help. But who knows, maybe I'll discover which God is the real God and be saved in my time of need, explained McMahon with a hint of passion in his serious tone. For all the troubles the world had suffered from McMahon's time in the sea, James wasn't expecting to see this side of McMahon gesturing to some form of salvation. And frankly, James didn't want McMahon to be saved. Instead, James just wanted justice, and if God was not willing to do it himself soon, James had no problems cutting Edwards's silver cord early and sending him straight to hell, figuring it would save God some time and the world from more pain from a pirate who was destined to go to hell anyway. Only disgust mixed with sarcasm came out of James's mouth in response to McMahon's disingenuous statement. "You're saved now." At this, McMahon was emotionally triggered by such a passive-aggressive comment aimed at his motives regarding any thoughts of salvation. McMahon believed James was a Christian, that he would understand and perhaps offer encouragement to help direct McMahon to some current feel-good Christian advice. Instead, it just tipped him into anger as he lashed out at James's sarcasm. If God was so good, do you think we would be here right now? Why does such a loving God allow so much suffering? Where is his love, James? Certainly not here. Where was God when he took my family away at a young age? Why is God so silent when I pray? Why do things completely fall apart when I ask for good and generous things? How dare you and all the Christians tell me anything about God, and how wonderful and merciful he is when you are all hypocrites? I have been blessed beyond measure, looting men to whom England, for the sake of profit, eagerly sells arms. I save lives that your God would allow to be abandoned at sea or war. You're a convicted murderer, with a heart set only on my revenge. Do not dare lecture me on morality when clearly England and God have failed us both. How can you say God and the words in that holy book, written by flawed men, can be true and faithful when places like this unnatural land and sea only seem to reflect Eastern religious ideologies? Our circumstances appear to validate the reincarnations I have witnessed after I kill repeatedly. I am more inclined to believe the Eastern tenets at this point than with 3 holy books with one God ruling them all. For me, seeing has always been believing. In fact, the one person in the entire Bible with whom I agree is with Thomas, the one smart enough to actually question the reality of Christ's existence on earth after he was crucified to death. And they called Thomas a doubter. But is he right to declare that seeing is believing? Mark my words, James, when I say this. No one actually knows which faith is true until the day of their own great judgment, when they see it for themselves. How can a man live by what he cannot see? How unfair is it that we are judged for the things we cannot see and sentenced to an eternity that punishes us for a lack of faith? What sort of madness in your God is this? If God really loved us, would he then not show us heaven and make it obvious what our choices would reap for the rest of eternity? Why hide everything behind some invisible magical world and then tell us to choose? And if you get it wrong, the price is suffering for the rest of eternity? Is this not madness, or do I not understand the God you serve? Do you suppose this insane life that you and I are presently living is our judgment, James? Or maybe this is just the beginning of our judgment. You claim to be a so-called Christian, so explain to me why your God has abandoned you here, with me, in this uncertain hell. There was a lull while McMahon waited for an answer from James. McMahon, your mind is so warped, and you're so removed from the truth. Are you sure you're not the blind one here? James received another unexpected swift blow to the gut, and instantly felt a wave of nausea as he vomited blood up onto the deck. This time the strike came from one of the crew members holding James erect. Speaking of truth, continued McMahon, once again calm in demeanor, the riddle spoke of blood telling the truth. When analyzing the riddle, I came to the conclusion that there is a correlation between the Hebrew symbol on each coin and all the coins together, creating a word when they are all together. I know the word is in Hebrew, but the problem is the symbols change with each cycle, and I can never fully figure out which word it is and how I would apply it, if I were to even figure out what the word says. Although the coding system is direct, locating the coins has been challenging indeed. For our current cycle, we have 4 more places to search for the remaining coins. Regrettably, this is a ring of islands that covers a lot of ground. My crew and I have been trying to find these coins for the last 39 cycles. We are now on our 40th cycle and have literally gone in circles trying to find the solution to escape these islands. In a way, you could say I am looking for salvation, specifically my own. This is a case in which I doubt your God could save us both. Anyhow, I believe that when all the coins are found, the numbers shall reveal a name, a location, or something that will help us flee before the perfect storm hits and unleashes its final, fatal fury. At the very least, the name should provide relief enough to tame the winds of this evil, to give us more time to search for another answer, or let us really escape in between the developing storms without getting caught in the eye of the storm every time. Either way, time is our enemy. At this point, James regarded McMahon as a man deep in the throes of lunacy. Edwards continued talking as if James was accepting McMahon's statements in full. You don't always see it coming, but look there, James. McMahon pointed towards the sea, where a storm began to slowly take shape, while lightning could be seen far off in the distance. The developing storm carried a darkness that one only could interpret as a threatening shade of true evil. The black raven, perched in the crow's nest, cawed repeatedly in a loud, harsh grating sound as a feeling of darkness enveloped the entire ship in the form of a cold wind. The air grew darker and started to encircle James and McMahon. McMahon paid no attention to this lifeless wind, developing a swirl around them all for the purpose of taunting them, as if to say it was undeniably coming for them. "This wind you feel is the storm that grows cold described in the riddle," said McMahon wearily. He sighed very slightly and continued, "I never imagined that I would ask you, of all people, but I need your help solving this vexing riddle. Clearly you have an uncanny ability to find these coins in the past cycles before these storms arrive. Unfortunately, at some pivotal point in the cycle you always seem to make a decision that foils any possibility of success for us. And this is only if I don't interfere by killing you first. Curiously, you're also most effective with that dog." McMahon pointed straight at the border collie, who reacted by giving a very low, very dramatic exhale. "In each cycle, the moment you choose to seek revenge on me, I'm forced to kill you and then search for the remaining coins on my own in order to solve this riddle. This absurd round of errors always thrusts me into a new cycle. As much as I've tried, I don't have whatever it takes to pass the trials required to obtain the coins, but I've seen you do it. Where I failed, you succeeded. Frankly, I am running out of options and sanity as I realize that you're the only one that has the keys to get us out of here." The low rumble of an earthquake suddenly struck below the seafloor, agitating the waters beneath the ship. Waves larger than normal surrounded the Corvus, threatening but never actually harming the Corvus. The waves had scared off the lifeless wind swirling between the two men, forcing it back to the place of its origin. McMahon voiced his concern. "Those quakes are getting more and more intense each day that we're here. I'm willing to bet one of them will trigger the volcano and this place will become a hellish inferno. Our deaths this cycle will be that of fire and ash. That is, if the storm doesn't take us first. I trust you see my frustration, can't you, James?" Unsettled by the distant developing storm, James was forced to face the bizarre reality of a colorless world. That disturbing aspect, along with the frequent rumbles of earthquakes and the unusual storm brewing in the background, caused James to reconsider. It was another trifecta, but in reverse of anything good he found when he first found Santos, the coin and riddle altogether. This unholy trifecta was a bet sure to lose everything. The combination made James think that perhaps McMahon wasn't as mad as James had previously thought. Somehow McMahon was telling the truth, at least from what James could see. After all, according to McMahon, seeing is believing. James looked at McMahon and addressed him in a tone verging on agreeable. "If you're telling the truth, I'll help you. But why coins and a riddle at all? How are you certain they're the solution to any of this?" "Some things I cannot explain," McMahon began simply. "As time goes on in this experience, the cycle repeats or resets and this place gets more painfully real with every round. Consequently, I must have a little faith in the things I cannot control or understand if I'm to survive this place at all. I must admit, I'm bewildered why I must place my faith in you. You and I have had fruitless discussions about the nature of our existence here. Somehow, I am slowly waking up to a reality that ends with my death. I don't want to die, as I fear death and the unknown beyond itself. It seems you have no recollection of our previous cycles, so I realize what I say sounds preposterous. But take heed of what I tell you. In the past I tried to outrun this storm, only to get caught in it every time and brought back here. When I am faced with this storm, every cycle further convicts me that the only way to escape this perfect storm is by solving the dead man's riddle. Those coins have everything to do with that. If those clues are the answer to getting out, I will take that risk, even if it seems illogical. I've come to the conclusion that I can't do this on my own. Ironically, by helping you come back to your senses, it benefits us both. I will find these coins. But under one condition." James paused as he noticed the rumbling had stopped, returning a sense of calm to the sea and a warm, light breeze back on the ship. "When it's all over and done, I want my justice. You and I on the deck of the HMS Revenge, one bullet in our firearm, each of us wielding one saber. No crew, just you and me. I will be damned to let you get away from me again for all the hell you already have. Brought me, my family, the world, and Sir Santos through. Do you agree to my demand?" McMahon regarded James with resignation. Always the same words, the same request, the same hate poisoning your soul and turning your blood from red to black spew, confusing revenge for justice. And it always ends the same way, me putting a sword into your stone-cold heart. At this point it doesn't seem like I have much of a choice, does it? I never do. mumbled McMahon as he searched his heart for any possible alternative. Then McMahon had a flash of insight that had never before crossed his mind in any of the cycles previous to this one. It gave him new hope that maybe this cycle would be different. "You have a deal." The men shook hands, and James immediately pulled his hand back as he felt something colder than ice seep into his palm and form a permanent, large, ink-black spot. McMahon took no notice of James's reaction and continued in a conversational tone. "To meet your conditions, we'll face each other at sunset on the deck of the Revenge, on the day when this black spot fades completely from our hands. I warn you, James, if you try to kill me, or if I kill you, or if one of us dies in any other form before the black spot disappears, it will be literal hell for the both of us. May this blessing, or curse, the black spot known as Cain's mark that now adorns your palm as well as mine, remind us to uphold our commitment and stay alive. Try not to get killed, or it's game over for the both of us," said McMahon as he grinned. In stark contrast to the menacing words McMahon had just uttered, he ended with an unexpected comment that caught James off guard. "You could say we are twinsies now," putting his hand up to show James his black spot. Before parting company, McMahon returned James's coin, released James from his guards, and ordered Master Beckett to find an officer's cabin for James's comfort and convenience for the night. This concludes the reading of Chapter 1, Parts 1 through 3.